the big one for me is FalleN. You know, the big one, as you kind of described right here, having a guy who his entire career has been an open in-game leader. And as you said, for the past 3 years, he has been a big part of the reason as why Fury have been, dare I say, shit. You know, they've been irrelevant. They've been horrible compared to the budget they've had to work with, compared to having Quesarado and Yuri in their prime, and they never really got the most out of them. And I partly blame FalleN for that, you know, because I don't think he was doing good enough with the AWP, and I don't think his calling was good enough to sort of mask the fact that he wasn't a great opper anymore. And that's also something you have to take into account. So for me, the biggest change was putting him from an open in-game leader to a rifling in-game leader. Sure, we can talk Ikinda, sure, we can talk Molodoi, and obviously they've done a lot of good stuff for Furia, but for FalleN to make that transition and be successful with it, that is the biggest surprise, and that's what I'm the most, I guess, impressed by within that whole Furia camp. Because I also do think that if you were to put FalleN through a lie detector, I think he was setting up his retirement. I think he was setting it up so that he could in-game lead for maybe 3 or 4 months. He could do one more major, and if everything went well, maybe he would do half a season more, and then he would retire. I think if you asked him, that was the plan all along, and I think he's even hinted that in certain interviews that this could be the last season for him. But I think with how well they're playing right now, with how well he's calling, with how well the team is functioning, with how well he's doing as an individual as well, compared to where we thought he would be. I thought he was going to be a Karrigan version 2, maybe even worse, which is, you know, not great at the moment, but he's even better. He's doing a better job than Karrigan in the fracking department, and I think he's even calling better at the moment. I don't think we necessarily have to see FalleN retire. I think he's going to ride this one out for as long as it makes sense, for as long as they continue to do well. And then I think it's always in the back of his mind that the second they start to fall off, or the second that FalleN is not keeping up to par with the rifling duties anymore, then they can make the change. Then he can transition into becoming a coach or retire or whatever. So I think, you know, from a player mindset, having a guy who's already accepted that I am going to retire within a couple of months, this could be my last tournament, then somehow, some way, finding in him to become good enough to a point where he can't really afford to retire, or where Fury as a team, you know, can't really afford him to retire, because they can't replace him with someone who's doing better than he is right now, which to me is crazy, because I thought he was done. I thought FalleN was, you know, we can speak about his career for as long as we want to, but in this very moment, before he transitioned from an AWPing in-game leader to the rifling in-game leader he is now, he was a liability in Furia. He was not good enough, and I think he would agree with that as well. So for him to make a comeback like that to me is the biggest story when it comes to Furia. And then yes, we can speak Ikinda, and yes, Molodoi has been a revelation and maybe the best signing of 2025, or at least in contention for it. But that Molotov signing wouldn't have looked as impressive had FalleN not been able to transition into an in-game leading rifler instead of the AWPing. And to me, that's hella impressive. Also set up Molotov, you know, to get in and kind of craft his own role within Furia. And, you know, you can say what you want about FalleN, but having him as a mentor with the AWP, maybe he couldn't do it himself anymore, mechanically speaking, but he knew what required to be a great AWPer, especially a combat AWPer like Molotov is as well. So I think there's a lot of things that now, you know, seeing as how well they're playing, it starts to make sense. But as you said, skeptical. I was very skeptical. I think everyone was in their good right to be skeptical. And I think if you were to ask Furia, if you were to ask FalleN himself, then it was a Hail Mary. You know, it was the last attempt before he would retire. Maybe it would work out, maybe it didn't, but it just turned out to be magical. And let's see for how long, because it's just a question of time still when he will eventually hang up the mouse and retire. But maybe he just bought himself another year. Who knows?
I think it was even implied that there was like pressure from both sides. Like he knew he was in a spot where like you're not going to win anymore if you're doing this, but also maybe the team were like, time to become a coach or something, or take a step back or whatever it might be. So actually this like compromise, I agree. Like it's basically, I also think if you put on the lie detector test, this wasn't like, this part of the move wasn't scouted that it would work. This is just like you said, it's Hail Mary. It's the last card you've got to play. If it works, you keep playing. If it doesn't, well, then you tried everything. Okay, now you can actually just leave, and you can leave with a clear conscience that like, I'm never going to be plagued by the what if. Like, obviously the worst thing if you were FalleN is that you retire and you're like, oh wait, I could have actually just been a right. I basically could have done what Cadian failed to do. I could have become a non-AWPing IGL. I could have brought in a different person as my AWPer, and then I could have had some success still, because as you say, Karrigan's the best example ever. He's basically done like a decade of not fragging people at this point in time. But here's the point, and there's a quick angle here that I think people miss, which is, you know how right now, if you followed FaZe, this is not news. You know, right now, everyone's like, after every game where Karrigan has a red score, they're like, fire him! He must retire! Right? The problem is, people have been saying that for half a decade. Literally half a decade. Because the problem is, this is actually a compliment to Karrigan. People expect every single Karrigan team to be able to win a tournament or to win a major, right? That's why every map he plays badly, even though, by the way, I'd argue in CSGO CS2 he's more of a legend than FalleN. I think he just is. I think if you look at what he's done, there's a reason no one has fallen in the GOAT conversation for IGL. It's not even a discussion. So to me, why do people treat Carrigan more harshly than FalleN? Here's why. Because actually nobody thought Fury could win. And everyone looked at their roster, the all Brazilian one, and they were like, yeah, it's got like, basically it's got Queserato, and then you have to just hope, Yuri has some bounce back games. He had some occasionally. But basically in that team, everyone had already accepted we're not going to win. So instead, their whole thing was, hey, at least I get to see FalleN play a bit more. Maybe he wins a clutch. Maybe he has the Presente half of a CT map, where he frags out with the AWP, and I get to have those cool nostalgic vibes, etc. It reminds me of this whole Rain conversation now. We'll probably get too late in this episode. My problem is I never tell people to retire, especially if you're a legend. But what I do say is this: you don't get to just there's no legends parking spot on major winners. That doesn't exist. Like, you have to actually be good at your role to some degree on a major winner. Otherwise, if you don't win those majors, you're just holding back Queserato. You're holding back the people who could do that and could win the major right now. And I think in a fucked up way, that's actually gross. That's sort of like the older generation vampirizing the young generation to get a little bit more life themselves. But it's like, bro, if we'd have done that to the older players, then you never would have seen some of the great players in history, because they'd have been stuck with some old IGL. I mean, by the way, you saw this in other scenes. God B eventually had to retire. He couldn't hit a barn with a fucking frying pan, bro. And it doesn't matter how good tactically he was. On his team, he didn't have 4 stars. And that brings me back to the Carrigan angle. And I think FalleN has met the mark that I have for players like this. If you're not going to be a strong player at all mechanically as an IGL, obviously you better be a wicked IGL. Luckily, Carrigan has managed to live up to that many, many times. Every time everyone says he's done, he bounces back, he gets the squad. But I think one of the problems is this. The reason FaZe now, I think, is fucked is they're trying to GM like a normal team and make like shrewd pickups. No. FaZe Clan always, for me, was we ran the team with stars, and then Carrigan just makes the calls and the stars win the game. That's what he's essentially a player manager. We don't actually have those in football anymore, but it used to be a thing that great players who were captains did at the end of their career for the last few years. You keep them in the game, but they essentially sort of like captain the game, and they're not the star anymore. They just run the team. That's what Carrigan gets to do. He's basically a coach that gets to play in the server, which if you have star players, mate, is OP. The problem is if you just have a normal team and he's supposed to frag people and do so, then you can have a lot of fucking problems. So I think FalleN had reached that point where if the Molodoi move and the Yukinda move didn't work, I also think this would just be a last season and he would retire, mate. And everyone would be able to go happily off into the sunset. Fury would go a different route. Who knows what they do at that point in time? You tell me. And so I think the key thing here is this.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.